Hello, everybody. It's Crazy John Kerecz, and I'm here again with you're probably the person I've interviewed the most, Gennady Stolyarov the second, and we said we were going to do an upcoming sequel, kind of we should say, to our last discussion because we're getting closer to the election, and a lot of things have happened. I'm not sure when we talked last. Did Harris was Harris the person yet or not?
Yes, she was. So Biden had already decided that he will not pursue the Democratic Party nomination. And it's interesting because this decision did change the dynamics of the race. As you recall, I stated that I thought strongly that if there were another rematch between Donald Trump and Joe Biden, Trump would beat Biden. But because Kamala Harris is not Joe Biden and she hasn't been president yet, essentially the American electorate, just like the electorates in most of the, let's say, more advanced Western countries, are essentially voting against the status quo. Kamala has greater chances to win simply because she could, to some extent, distance herself from the status quo. But she also has the vulnerability of being part of the current administration. And if you listen to the debate that happened between J.D. Vance and Tim Walz, you could hear that J.D. Vance was exploiting that to the fullest. He was criticizing the policy decisions that have been made during the last 3 years and calling them the decisions of the Kamala Harris administration. He barely mentioned Biden at all. And he attributed all of these decisions that he wanted to characterize as negative as coming from Kamala Harris or somehow associated with her. And why did he do that? Precisely to create this association between Kamala Harris and the status quo so that people who want to vote against the status quo would vote against Kamala Harris. Now, on the other hand, Kamala Harris has barely mentioned Joe Biden as well. So, from her standpoint, she doesn't want to be associated with Joe Biden because Biden is the status quo. But it's interesting that in each of the two major parties' narratives, there is an attempt to distance Harris from Biden in a certain way from the Republican side by trying to make Harris the central figure in the current administration rather than Biden. And from the Democratic side, by showing that Harris is essentially her own person, that Biden, well, he's kind of there, but Harris is really running her own campaign. At least that's the perception they want to cultivate.
I am sorry to say that I didn't fully introduce you, really. You are the chairman of the Transhumanist Party, and you are also an author of a book and on death, or a children's book on death. And people should look that up on Amazon.
Yes, death
And
is wrong. That
yes,
is the name of the book.
death is wrong. But now, getting back to your matrix. So, how do you think that now I have a couple of things about Harris that I actually do like. I do like the fact that she always seems happy. Uh, I don't know what that matters, but it makes you feel better about someone when they're happy and they're not grumpy. And that sounds like a weird thing to say about a candidate, but to some extent, I always thought that some of the reason that Hillary lost was that people perceive her kind of as a grumpy old school teacher in her demeanor. So I do think that the refreshingness of Harris makes you feel nicer when you see her, which I think does matter. Like when you say things about, how they're trying to distance and this and that, but just her refreshingness sets her apart from Trump. And I think that is interesting to me. And I think that feel friendly could be on her side. But getting back to your matrix, how do you think the fact that she is part of the last, or the existing, I should be, administration. It's funny because people are already referring to Biden as the ex-president when he's still in office. But I have noticed that recently they are starting to talk about him like that. But how do you think that that affects that matrix? Then that makes her not totally a new commodity, but not the same old commodity. So, what are your
Yes.
thoughts on that?
And I think this is what introduces uncertainty into the outcome. That's why J.D. Vance was essentially driving home this message that it's the Kamala Harris administration that is somehow responsible for the current policies. And then the question is, to what extent would an actual Kamala Harris administration continue the policies of the Biden administration, which have been deleterious? And of course, as chairman of the Transhumanist Party, I don't support either the Democrats or the Republicans, and I want to be even handed in my criticism of each of them. But I do think there are aspects of the policy of the Biden administration, particularly on the foreign policy front, which has been rather detrimental in fueling this war in Ukraine, in diverting resources away from the United States and essentially saddling the US economy with additional burdens, increasing the cost of gasoline because of the supply chain disruptions that arose from the war in Ukraine, and also heightening tensions with China, essentially employing very belligerent rhetoric against China, even though China hasn't invaded any country or has not invaded Taiwan and does not seem to have plans for military territorial expansionism. On the other hand, Donald Trump is not exactly a paragon of peace either. And if he were to be elected president, he would likely stoke additional tensions with Iran, whereas the Biden administration has tried to some extent to restrain Netanyahu on two distinct occasions right now. The Iranian government launched missiles at Israel, and the US military helped Israel essentially destroy most of the incoming missiles before they were able to do any damage. And as a result, essentially, there was an opportunity to de escalate. So, because there wasn't so much damage done, the Biden administration was able to persuade Netanyahu's government not to retaliate with greater force, not to fuel the cycle of violence, to essentially take the win and move on. But it seems that Netanyahu is quite belligerent at this stage. He has expanded Israel's war into Lebanon, even after the leader of Hezbollah, Hassan Nasrallah, was killed. So why is Netanyahu doing that, given that Hezbollah has been crippled already? He's doing that to stay in power, because if this war ends, Netanyahu's government will end, and Netanyahu will likely be prosecuted on corruption charges, which he is likely guilty of, and which were already well known before October 7th, 2023. So I think with either of these administrations, we're going to have a mixed bag in terms of foreign policy. In terms of domestic policy, some of the measures of the Biden administration have contributed to the significant inflation that was occurring in 2022 and 2023, especially, though some of that inflation also was the result of COVID and the result of the scarcity of goods and services that arose as the secondary and tertiary effects of the pandemic. The pandemic killed millions of people. The pandemic created massive economic disruption, less production across the board. So, of course, with more money chasing fewer goods and services, prices are going to increase. But the fact is, as I mentioned before, Donald Trump's greatest advantage is to be able to ask the question to American voters, are your lives better now, or were they better in 2019 when I, Donald Trump, was president? And if you recall some of the rhetoric that Trump and Vance have been using recently, that rhetoric has been along these lines. So they want voters to make a favorable comparison between the pre-pandemic times and the status quo, and to blame first Biden and now Kamala Harris for the status quo. So that's their rhetorical strategy, and they may win if they succeed in employing it. Kamala's rhetorical strategy is essentially to say she's her own person, and this will be a reset. This will be a different kind of administration than the Biden administration. And she can't blame Biden for anything. She doesn't want to go against Biden because her legitimacy within the Democratic Party machine, the Democratic Party succession system, is essentially completely dependent on her being Biden's vice president. The Democratic Party has a very clear internal hierarchy, and there is every election season an understanding that it's somebody's turn. So the reason why Hillary ran in 2016 was because it was considered to be her turn, and she had waited for a long time, very patiently, etc. And the Democratic Party is not so much a personalist type of organization. So it's not beholden to one individual the same way that the Republican Party now has essentially been captured by Donald Trump. It's more of a kind of oligarchic machine, let's say. So there's this idea that people who serve the machine and carry out its interests get their turn in office. But the machine will work in similar ways with or without them. So I had the strong view that Biden was a figurehead during his term, and which is why, as you mentioned, it's so easy for people now to think of him as an ex-president. It's so easy for people to think of him as a has-been, and he hasn't made that many public appearances either, because he is really only useful to the machine as long as there is perceived legitimacy, that he can speak as some sort of convincing character, some sort of convincing figurehead. But now that people know he's not running for re-election again, they're paying attention to Kamala, and the machine is grooming Kamala to be that figurehead. But if you recall, before she became the presidential nominee, her stage presence and the kinds of opportunities that she was given to represent the Democratic Party's platform and policy ideas were not that significant. So Kamala was kind of on the sidelines, and now she's at center stage. But it's the same machine working. And it's interesting, too, that Vance made reference to the machine in his debate with Tim Walz. So he kind of sees this. He's not exactly a Trump type of Republican either. I think he's playing along with Trump, but he has his own views, and he has criticized Trump quite heavily before. He may still agree with these criticisms, by the way, but he sees a path to greater prominence. And I think he's a very clever political player, essentially. He is someone whom we will see on the political stage for a long time. He's 40 years old right now, quite articulate, and he has a much more coherent vision of what the problems are with the everyday experience of American life, the kinds of issues that official statistics like GDP measures don't capture. So this will be very interesting because Vance's rhetoric kind of throws a wild card into this election. And I would say if Kamala can persevere in portraying herself as her own person and sufficiently different from the Biden administration, she might convince enough voters that this is the case. But if Vance points to the Democratic machine and kind of exposes it, then he might be able to essentially clinch a victory for Trump, unless Trump kind of undercuts it. Because in the debate with Kamala, Kamala actually did what she needed to do, which is to get Trump to express his grievance mongering, essentially, how everybody is against him, how unfairly he has been treated, all the old rhetoric that we've been hearing from him. And that was essentially the end of the Trump-Harris debate. And I think Trump compared unfavorably with Harris on that debate stage as a result.
I talking about JD Vance. I was surprised. I didn't necessarily like what he was saying, but I thought he was a good speaker, and I think that will interest people and rally them behind him. The fact that he was a good speaker. I mean, I think he was bending reality here and there, and I like the way he didn't answer some questions and said that's not now. We're going to stay on this, and it's you know he was a lot better than I thought he would be. To give him credit, and that is interesting to me. And another thing I've noticed about this now, you talked about the differences between the party, and I might have said this before, but in some ways, it's almost embarrassing to me how some people have that didn't like Trump and openly didn't like Trump when they see him and they think he's going to be the president, how they've jumped on board with him. And it's basically they want to run with him because they believe he's going to get there and they're going to get the crumbs and get something for being along on the ride with him. And it's even Elon Musk, who I like Elon Musk. Last time he quit working with Trump because of Trump being Trump, but now he's jumped on board with Trump. And I can't think of the guy that owns the sports teams, and he's on the Shark Tank, the head guy. I can't think of his name. I saw an interview with him, and he said basically, Elon's doing it because if Trump becomes president again, Elon will have his ear. And it's interesting to me how people will bend, because of what they're hoping to get out of it, not really sticking with what they really believe. And it's not what they believe, but they're jumping with it because they want that piece of the pie when they're hoping he's going to give them some, and it's going to mean something to them. And it's just interesting view of human nature to me, if that makes sense.
Yes.
And I always talk about that when we talk about AI. I'm always worried that AI will develop the same problems that people do. But you had given me some good points the one time. But I'm just saying I sometimes you just get older and you look and you say sometimes what people do, and you're just shocked that they do it. So that shocks me a lot about those people that were, and Vance was one of those people that said negative things about him beforehand too. And then they jump on and everybody wants to ride the ride because they feel it's going somewhere. It's sad and interesting all at the same time.
Well,
And
Vance even called Trump America's Hitler, and Nikki Haley essentially had heavy criticisms of Trump, and now she's endorsed him. And Ted Cruz, do you remember how Trump treated Ted Cruz during the 2016 election season? But it shows essentially what the two-party system does to people, that people could genuinely despise the presumptive frontrunner and think that this person is dangerous. But once the processes of the two-party system have played themselves out, somehow they once again come on board with this dangerous candidate, whoever that person is. And likewise, on the Democratic side, when Hillary Clinton was running, she was despised by a large proportion of the Democratic voters, especially Bernie Sanders' base. But when Bernie Sanders ultimately dropped out, even though he wasn't treated fairly during the Democratic primary process, and essentially the super delegates had been, let's say, compelled by the DNC to support Hillary, unless they were, of course, part of the political establishment and they wanted to support Hillary anyway. But Bernie Sanders endorsed Hillary and urged his supporters to do the same, and most of them did. So it's interesting how there's this mentality in the two-party system of backing the winner rather than backing the person with whose views one agrees with the most. And this is where the Transhumanist Party stands out, because we are urging our members and others in the United States to support the candidate who they believe is closest to their views. I think that a single person's vote, especially in a system like the US system, which has the Electoral College, where there are really only a few battleground states, and all of the other states will be reliably captured by one of the two parties or the other. A single person's vote cannot sway the outcome of the election. But what it can do is it can send a signal about what people's actual preferences are. And it would be easier to persuade more people of this with ranked choice voting. Ranked choice voting allows people to rank order their candidates. So if they really dislike one major party's candidate more than another, they could either not vote for that really disliked candidate or place the candidate they dislike a little bit less above the really disliked candidate in their rank ordering, but still put as their first choice the candidate whom they truly prefer. Now, ranked choice voting has been adopted in Maine and Alaska, as well as in various cities, about 40 cities in the United States. And it's actually on the ballot in several states this election season, including Nevada, where it is ballot question 3. So I actually think for this election, of course, you should write in Tom Ross and Daniel Tweed in a state that allows write-ins. But even if you can't write in a candidate, if you can vote for a ballot question that would allow ranked choice voting in your state, like question 3 in Nevada, that could be the most important issue that you would vote on. Because in Nevada, the state constitution requires a particular ballot issue that was submitted via a petition process to be passed by the voters 2 times in order for that question to become law. And Nevada's voters already passed question 3 in the 2022 election. But now both the Democratic Party and the Republican Party are expending heavy amounts of money lobbying against it, putting up advertisements, being really misleading and disingenuous. They think, oh, ranked choice voting is going to be confusing. What, people can't rank order their choices? They don't understand how that works. So they're being really insulting to the voters in saying this. But I think the fact that both of these established political parties oppose ranked choice voting should say something about ranked choice voting being a threat to this duopoly. So I think people, when they vote this time, should steer clear of falling into this two-party trap, because the moment they fall into the two-party trap, the moment they embrace one side over the other, the system has essentially captured them. And they will essentially subordinate their vote and their voice in service to a set of agendas that would be enacted no matter which side wins. So there are some differences clearly between the Republicans and the Democrats. But one aspect that is not different is this use of othering or demonization of 50% of the population to essentially keep people's attention and anger focused on something other than the overall problems with the system, like the problems that are causing inflation, the problems that are causing war, the problems that are slowing down our rate of technological progress. And those are the problems that we need to solve for the entirety of the American people, not just 50% of them.
Yeah, a lot of it's, you said that about, sometimes I think they fall back to the party and they just want the party to, be behind their party. But yet there's people that switch parties, so it's interesting to me uh, how they do that too. I was thinking about how, you said that they fall behind who's ever in charge, but there's a lot of people that do that just for the party. You know, I think a lot of the Republicans in the Times have not liked Trump, but the fact that the masses seem to like him and hear what he's saying, makes them jump on board with him because they want the party to win. They'd rather have, I know what I was thinking when you were talking. It reminded me of that statement, sometimes it's better to have the devil you know than the devil you don't know. And I think a lot of times they feel that way. A lot of times the people want to have the devil they know, not the devil they don't know. And in this case, Trump is kind of the devil they do know, and Harris is kind of the devil they don't know. Although I think some people want change, uh, others sometimes are afraid of change. And, it was interesting to me too. I still get on that Clubhouse, which is kind of a dying app. And I'm on there a number of nights a week listening to the conversations. And I was really surprised at how many women did not support Harris, and also how even some of them were Black women that did not support Harris. And they would say things about how they felt a man need to be in charge, not a woman. And I'm like, oh my God, there's a number of women on here talking about how they feel that way. And to me, I was surprised because that's kind of sexist. Uh, just because she's a woman, they felt that a man would be better and that foreign people, foreign policy people would be afraid of him more because of it being a man. And it's interesting to me how even in this day and age of the Me Too just happening and all that stuff and the woke stuff, how all these women are not giving her kudos. They're saying they feel a man would be better because they think a man would be better. And that's, to me, that's sad in some ways too. I mean, other countries have had women in charge. I mean, uh, so it's interesting to me when you see people do this kind of stuff. And I'm shocked. I'm just shocked, especially in this day and age.
Yes.
I would feel better about it. But it's just interesting to me. I did want to say, though, Transhumanist Party, just because we've touched on it but haven't touched on it. Transhumanist Party has their own candidates, and I'm here on the website now, and I do love some of the stuff that says on the website. I love that a growing movement fighting for the future of humanity, and I like that putting science, health, and technology at the forefront of American policies. So that's about the Transhumanist Party, and Transhumanist Party has their candidates: Tom Ross for president and Daniel Tweed for vice president. And I just wanted to make sure, I know we've kind of skimmed around that slightly, but I wanted to make sure the people listening, if they're not totally familiar, know that. And we quite often talked about, showing that there is another option, not just the Democrats and Republicans. And that, again, you sort of mentioned into that, and, showing people that there's other choices, and hopefully give these other choices, if not now, in the future, more of a foothold. I forget what country it was, but I was listening to somebody from another country. I was kind of thinking it was either Spain or Italy, and somebody made some comments. Well, how many parties do they have in your country? And the gentleman said, well, as many parties as there's people running. Sometimes he says sometimes everybody belongs to their own party. He says, and you have a bunch of different people running. And I thought to myself, it's kind of different than this country where we do have the two parties do have a stronghold on the system, and it is truthful. It gets to the point where people feel at the end they don't want to vote for who they really want because it's going to either help or hurt one of the other parties. And it's sad it comes down to that a lot of times. I mean, I know, with some of the other third parties like the Green Party and stuff, and they've been happy when they get a certain number of votes to show that they can get those votes. And, people are just kind of forced into this party system we have here. And it would be good that we could break out of that. I hate to say this, though, I was hoping to some extent uh, Robert Kennedy Jr. might sway people to vote for an outside person. I mean, I like the Kennedy family. I'm not sure about Bobby Jr. I call him Bobby Jr. I wasn't sure about where he's coming from all the time. Some things about him I like, some things I question. But I just would have liked to seen him stay separate and at least show that a third party person. I think if he would have stayed separate, the places he was on the ballot, I think he would have gotten some votes and showed that somebody on the outside could get some votes. And that kind of falls back into what we said before. I think Bobby Jr. kind of did the same thing a lot of other people did. Eventually, he just jumped on with Trump. And that's another issue where that might have been done in a way that really wasn't quite legal too. If he was kind of persuaded to come over and enticed with things, I think it's against the rules to entice somebody or promise some things to come over before the election. After the election, it's okay, but before the election is a little bit questionable. So it's just some of my
Yes.
thoughts out there. It would have been nice if he had stayed on and he would have gotten a good vote for the reason of showing that people would vote for a third person. You know,
Right.
that would have
Right.
been nice. I don't know
And
what your thoughts are on that.
I do wish that RFK Jr. had remained an independent. He is far removed from my own views in many areas, especially when it comes to science and technology and medicine. However, I always support voters having another choice. And it did seem to me that he wasn't acting like a true independent all along because he didn't want to debate other third party candidates or independent candidates. The Free and Equal Elections Foundation extended invitations for him to participate in its debates, and he did not show up, even though he was at the same venue at Freedom Fest in Las Vegas, so he could very well have participated. But I think he was always positioning himself to be essentially an influencer in perhaps either of the major parties' campaigns, whichever party would have him. But this is the pernicious dynamic of the two-party system, where sometimes ostensibly independent candidates or ostensible challengers actually serve to feed support into one side or the other. And RFK's campaign essentially ended up being a feeder campaign for Donald Trump. And that is really a waste of that energy, whatever enthusiasm a third party or independent run would have generated. So RFK Jr. has definitely disappointed me in this regard. In terms of women running for president, of course, I myself am a supporter of the ability for that to happen. And I have voted for a woman for president before in 2020 for Jo Jorgensen when she was running for the Libertarian ticket. But I will point out that if Nevada had allowed write-ins, I would have written in the Charlie Cam, Liz Parrish Transhumanist Party ticket in 2020. So we've had a female vice presidential candidate in our party's history. What is interesting is I think it's not really possible to infer somebody's views on questions such as this one solely based on their demographics. So, as a prominent example, Ayn Rand was a renowned and highly commercially successful writer and philosopher in the 20th century. And she emigrated to the US from Russia. It was the Soviet Union at that time, but Russia had a history of female leaders, especially in the 18th century, when about three-quarters of the 18th century passed with women being at the head of Russia. If you think about Catherine the First, Catherine the Second, there were also empresses, Anna and Elizabeth. Elizabeth was the daughter of Peter the Great. So all of these women together ruled Russia for about three-quarters of a century. And Ayn Rand came from that culture. And she herself was a woman. And she was an independent and successful, professionally successful woman. So she clearly didn't want to see women limited in that way. But she did write an essay, and she stated publicly that she would never support a woman being president. And her rationale, it was very specific to how she perceived the male and female genders, and she had a very clear idea, essentially, of kind of philosophical gender roles, though she wouldn't have characterized them that way. But I think it would be a surprise if one were just told, oh, she's a woman who achieved a lot of success on her own, and she came from a country with a history of women leaders, and yet she didn't support a woman being a leader of a country. She wouldn't have minded her being the leader of a company or having some sort of civilian, completely civilian leadership role. So I would say a lot of people these days seem to make assumptions or prejudge what a person's outlook will be based on circumstantial attributes, gender or skin color or where they came from. But I'm an individualist. So I judge people as individuals. And that's also a reason why I wouldn't have a problem with a woman being president, provided that it's a woman who aligns with my views and my values and would implement policies that I think are reasonable and hopefully the correct policies. But I see other people as individuals too. And I think it's important to almost take a blank slate approach when looking at a person in regard to what that person's political views are likely to be, because one might be surprised and they could each have their own reasons. Like maybe you mentioned these Black women who oppose Kamala's candidacy. Maybe they think that somehow she's perhaps playing up the fact that she's a Black woman, but they might be thinking, well, why her and why not one of us, or something like that. That's just one possibility. Or it could be they think that she is not a meritorious example of what a Black woman could be. And they think there are other Black women who might be better. So it's really dependent on individuals and what they believe. And I think we have an ability as transhumanists to also transcend these kinds of distinctions and appeal to everyone and communicate that we seek the uplifting of all of humanity through science and technology and medicine. These are goods that everybody could receive some advantage from. Longer lives, greater health, greater quality of life, greater abundance, freedom to pursue what they want to do. Think about how AI can empower people to be more creative, whoever they are. And I think we're going to see some very interesting outlooks from people as well as the diversity of individuals increases, because people will come to have even greater differences in their life paths and experiences and why they come to think certain things. So it'll be even harder to look at someone. What if in 20 years, people will be able to modify some of their exterior features of appearance? And then it would be even more difficult to presuppose, well, what does this person think if he has green skin and orange hair, for instance? What would his preference be for a particular candidate? I don't think you could say. I think you'd have to meet that person and talk to him or her or it and figure out where they stand.
Yeah, that's some good points. I did want to say though about the Transhumanist Party candidates for people. We talk about the two parties and stuff. And, when they go in there to vote, if there's an option, they could write one of the candidates in, or if they are on the ballot and you're not happy with the other two parties, feel free to put them down so that there is a message sent that people want something different. I mean, that's the thing, is to also make, put a message out there that other people might be wanted, and eventually it might change. I agree with you. Everybody is different. You can't always expect, just look at a person and say, oh, because he looks like that, he's going to do this. That's very hard to do. And it's like they call that. What do they call that? Where you look at someone and you kind of typecast them in a way, and that's very wrong and backward in itself. But people do that. So I mean, I don't know. You work in a situation where people are going to do that. I think that's why they try to spin their web about them the way they do when they're doing the elections. Why, Harris is trying to separate herself from Biden a little bit, and why they're trying to associate her with Biden. Uh, Everybody tries to weave the web and look a little differently to people. Now, we've been on here for a while. I didn't know if there's anything else you wanted to say about the Transhumanist Party and the election. I know before I'm done tonight, though, I did want you to make a guesstimation, if you want to call it, or a what do you want to call that? A prediction of who you actually think might win. I mean,
So
and then we'll see then how it goes. I have to admit, I really thought, I'm jumping around here a little bit. Sorry. I really thought when Harris first took it and it went steamrolled ahead that it was going to make a difference and she was going to be the person that they were going to vote for. But now that's I think that steamroller has slowed a little bit. I think that JD is a better speaker than I expected him to, and that might sway some people. I'm still not sure of the content, let me put it that way. But he was a better speaker than I thought he would be, and that might sway people. So I would have myself before liked to say it was going to be Harris, but some things just keep kind of going back and forth. And I do, I'll go on the limb and say this. I was a little suspicious of that second attempt on Trump's life, how it seemed to come at a time when he was faltering and staggering a little bit with Harris, and how he just happened to decide to go to play golf that day, and they just happened to catch someone attempting. And and the thing is too, after he got shot at the first time and he had that ear injury, I don't see any close-ups on his ear to show that he has any scars or anything of his ear. I have not seen anything on that from either party. And I question some of that. I mean, I hate to be, I I feel the older you get, the more you worry about conspiracies in some ways, and you feel like, oh my God, I'm becoming that person. But it's interesting how I look at that, and I'm like, I'm surprised that the Democrats haven't asked to see more close-ups of his ear and stuff. But the Republicans haven't pushed it, nor have the Democrats. And I wonder to myself, I mean, there's that old saying about calling the kettle black, and it's like, maybe there's things that they're both guilty of that they both know, so they don't point out certain things about each other sometimes during the campaign. And you would think if he had gotten shot that he had to wear that pillow on his head for a while, like he was doing, that you'd see some sort of scar or something obviously on his ear. But neither side seems to say anything about that. Like, oh, the ear healed up well, it's only a little bit, or the Democrats say, oh, well, let's have a look at that ear. It doesn't look like it's, but neither side seems to be saying anything about it, which is odd to me. I'm just saying, it seems like it's something that they could both be trying to use, and neither one of them's approaching it, which seems vaguely odd. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that, just for a weird thing to throw out there?
Well, I think the two assassination attempts were definitely real. And the reason why they happened was because of the increasingly polarized and emotionally charged, unhinged character of the political rhetoric in the United States. And that leads people who are unbalanced, impressionable, already capable of lashing out, people with short tempers, to go that extra step and actually inflict political violence. So I think, especially in the second case with Ryan Routh, he has a history of incendiary online rhetoric. He wanted to essentially go fight in the war in Ukraine. He had some belligerent statements to make there. And it seems that one doesn't need any sort of, let's say, ideas that something might have been staged or allowed to happen in a country with over 300 million people, some of whom are just not in their right minds. And whereas most ordinary people, if they hear even highly inflammatory political rhetoric, they will say, essentially, this is too much, or I don't agree with it, or even if I do agree with it, I'll take it in a certain context. Like when most Democrats hear Trump as an existential threat, they don't think eliminate Trump. They think defeat Trump in the election, or perhaps thwart him through some sort of legal process. But it just takes one person with a weapon to essentially perpetrate that kind of act. And furthermore, once somebody tries to do it once, there will be copycats. There will be other people who think that they can essentially become famous. They'll have their name and picture all over the news, and they haven't amounted to anything else in their lives. And this is kind of their shot, uh, no pun intended, their shot at glory. And that, I think, is what motivated these assassination attempts. Now, I think one reason why the Democrats don't try to, let's say, question that these were real assassination attempts so much is because they're worried about the precedent being set. So if either of these attempts either led Trump to lose his life or to be more seriously injured, there would be a militant segment of the American public on the far right who would think that Democratic politicians are now fair game. And the Democrats do not want to see an escalation into that territory. And I agree, it's extremely dangerous to go there. And therefore, when these assassination attempts happened, the leading Democratic politicians uniformly and very vocally condemned the assassination attempts, as they should have. But I think if the rhetoric were to shift to, oh, is this really as bad as it seemed, or anything like that, then that would essentially suggest to some of these fanatics, oh, this isn't completely off limits. And as nasty as some of the political rhetoric has been this past decade, I don't think either of the two major political parties wants to go there or anywhere near there. And one example of how this might be influencing the election season is actually the debate between J.D. Vance and Tim Walz. I was impressed at how civil they were both to one another, and how they sometimes agreed with one another's points. Sometimes they would say, well, I know you don't intend this bad thing, but your running mate does, or something like that. So that when they were interacting directly with one another on that debate stage, they could be at least mostly respectful. There was an instance where J.D. Vance tried to shout over Tim Walz on the moderator and not let the moderator proceed to the next question. And I think that was a bit out of line. But compared to what Trump and Biden both did during their debates, it was still relatively mild. So there may be a return to greater baselines of civility through the characters of these newcomers, relative newcomers, J.D. Vance and Tim Walz. Obviously, they've had political experience before. They're part of their respective party systems, but not everybody in the American electorate knows who they are. And as a result, they can perhaps introduce some of these more civil norms of conduct back into the discourse. And what that suggests to me is that these assassination attempts really rattled the party establishments. These assassination attempts really told the Democratic and Republican Party insiders that the tone of political discourse in the United States cannot be allowed to deteriorate further, because then we will go from just acrimony and insults and people ostracizing one another to political killings. And once one goes there, the society essentially doesn't recover. If you look at the history, for instance, of the Roman Republic and how it degenerated, or the French Revolution, for example, a society doesn't recover unless there's a complete change to the political order, and even then, many decades later. So I think this is why this last debate was so civil and relatively normal by American political historical standards. Now, in terms of who I think will win, at this point, I think the events are changing so rapidly that all I can do is say, what does each of them need to do in order to win and persuade the American public of? So J.D. Vance essentially is Trump's best chance of winning, because he can persuade the American public that Trumpism isn't as unhinged as it seems, essentially, that there's some more coherent set of ideas behind it. And also, if he can point to the Democratic political machine and its problems and associate Kamala with that, then he might be able to win. On the other hand, Kamala would be able to win if she can essentially convince the American people that she is not the status quo, that she offers something new and different and an opportunity for a new path forward. So essentially, each of them have to make the case that they are less like the status quo than their opponent. And the least status quo-like perception is going to be the one that carries the day. Now, for the Transhumanist Party, what I will say is we are the least status quo-like party of them all, because we actually support dramatic technological changes that will empower every individual to do what only large organizations or governments are able to do, that will empower every individual to be the architect of his or her or its life for as long as they wish, without any sort of upper bound. And that vision can only be achieved if we support scientific research, particularly in longevity or life extension. And if we overcome these petty partisan differences and look for policy-oriented politics rather than party-oriented politics. What we are going to do will be to publish a map on our website in the coming weeks of states in terms of how they vary in their allowances for write-ins. So about 41 jurisdictions in the United States allow write-ins of some sort. Not all states will count the write-ins, but that's all right, because if you write in Tom Ross and Daniel Tweed and you send us an email with either a statement that you did that, or ideally a picture of your ballot in states that allow that. Then we can tabulate your vote, even if the Secretary of State in your state or territory won't. So in that case, we will have a tally of votes, just as we did in 2020 for Charlie Cam and Liz Parrish. And we will publish that result, essentially, to show people, hopefully, that there is significant support for transhumanism, for putting science, health, and technology at the forefront of American politics. And I can guarantee you, there is no political party other than the Transhumanist Party that will explicitly talk about radical life extension, that will explicitly talk about artificial intelligence being a force for good more so than a danger, about the empowerment of humans to discover their distinctive advantages and their distinctive value in an age of rapidly advancing AI. There will not be another political party that ties together all of these realms of emerging technology, from progress in medicine and biotechnology and nanotechnology to artificial intelligence and automation and space travel and vertical farming and innovations in governance like ranked choice voting or blockchain voting or proportional representation. We encompass this breadth of emerging advances, and transhumanism is the unifying idea behind them all. Transhumanism is the idea that through science, technology, and reason, we can overcome the age-old limitations with which our species has been shackled. Our very mortality, indeed, could be overcome through these advances. And what is less status quo-like than that? I would encourage everybody to support the U.S. Transhumanist Party in this election cycle, and also join us for free at transhumanist-party.org/membership so that you can stay involved, and also tune in to our weekly virtual enlightenment salons, which are streamed every Sunday at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, 1 p.m. Pacific Time on my YouTube channel.
Well, thank you. You know, it's great getting your views. I know I threw some crazy thoughts out there, but sometimes you got to wonder, and it's a pity, to be honest with you, that in this day and age, let me just say that, you know, the politicians are kind of, like to use the old word, shenanigans. They're out there doing shenanigans, and it makes it a questionable thing where you question the candidates and actually where they're even coming from and what you can believe and what you can't believe, because they're not sticking to policy. They're not really rounding out policies. They're not really saying exactly what they're for. And that's really, you know, you get a vague feeling sometimes from what they say. And, you know, it's interesting. It's just interesting, but it would be nice for it to go back to a time like that. And, you know, I do agree with you that maybe the J.D. Vance in the future will become a candidate. And I do think he, you know, additional candidate, I mean, for other things. He did show some promise in the fact that he could talk well. And he did support Trump. I heard that too. So that was kind of refreshing. I didn't expect to feel something refreshing from him, or like you said, they were both very nice to each other. There wasn't that same feeling. I mean, I think, and I felt bad about it. I think sometimes with Biden, I think him getting older, I think he gets tired at night, because I've been to speech places where he speaks. I think I've said before, during the day, and he did gave good speeches, but at nighttime during the debate, he seemed slower and tireder. But I think also the fact that he felt attacked and he felt angry totally off tracked him. Sort of like Harris tried to off track Trump. I think Trump does that to people himself. He throws them off, and then they're just like you know, shocked, confused, and I think even angry, and that engulfs them that they can't really continue to debate properly like they should. So, I'd like to see a return in politics to where they tell you what they're about. And the Transhumanist Party does tell you what they're about. Uh, and that is how the views and the beliefs. And I think we need that more of that basically transparency in things. And it's just it to me in some ways it's sad that we've come to this point in some things, and it is sad that there are attempted life, people are attempting life on the candidates, any candidate, or they've done that in the past, and they're doing it twice now with him. And you're right, that's a scary thing. And what does it show people? And you don't want to show it that it gets more interested in people doing it. Uh, so it's a slippery slope with some of that. But I guess we're speak again afterwards, after the event of next
Yes.
month.
But
And
before that, I would encourage everybody, you and all of your viewers, to join us on Sunday, October 6th at 4 p.m. Eastern Time on my YouTube channel for our virtual celebration of the 10-year anniversary of the founding of the U.S. Transhumanist Party, because we were founded 10 years ago on October 7th, 2014, by Zoltan István. So we have endured for a decade already, and this will be an occasion where Zoltan will be present and other figures from our history like Charlie Cam will be there. And we will also be celebrating International Longevity Month on that day. So before all of the chaos engulfs this country leading up to the election, let's have a celebratory occasion, at least one of them.
I would, I feel bad. I do miss a lot of them because I am at my job, even though I'm retired. I do have a job at an energy office, and in an old brick building, a concrete brick building, that I have a horrible signal in there. There were a couple of times we tried to connect and you kept getting lost. But I'm going to try to get on that. It sounds great, and hope everybody that has listened to this does get on with that. Uh, and I want to thank you again for being with us. Your views are always great. I like hearing your ideas on things. Uh, Sometimes you make me see a lot of things that I don't see necessarily myself. I mean, when we've had our conversations about AI and stuff, you've made me realize some things about that which were very. You have some good points, and you always have some good points. And I like to say you're like an old soul. You hear that thing about people, and you're an old soul, and you've done a lot already in your life, and hopefully you keep doing it. Maybe you want to run for president one of these days. Uh, but I don't know. Have you ever thought about that yourself?
Well, the U.S. Constitution currently would not render me eligible. I
I forget
think
about that. Yeah.
that should be modified, but really, these past two election cycles, I have been coordinating presidential campaigns behind the scenes, so perhaps that is my role. I don't really have personal ambitions to hold political office. I just want to see good people there who will enact rational policies that will move all of humanity forward. And if other people are president, it really doesn't matter to me. What matters to me is that the correct decisions are made, the decisions that will advance all of our lifespans and our well-being.
So I'm gonna make this. I'm gonna say you're sort of like the longevity Henry Kissinger in a way. There, you know.
Well, there's an interesting parallel because Kissinger too was not born in the United
That's
States.
why I said that.
Yes.
Yep.
And he lived to be 101, which is not bad for someone of his generation. Indeed, it's quite an admirable lifespan to have reached the triple digits. And by the way, I have a great deal of respect for Henry Kissinger. He was not perfect by any means, but he actually was guided by the desire to avoid nuclear war, to de escalate tensions. He was one of the main architects of detente between the US and the Soviet Union, as well as improved relations between the United States and China. And I think largely, despite, of course, some clear mistakes that he made, his influence led the world to be a more peaceful and stable place for a few decades.
I meant that in a good way. I like
Mm-hmm.
Kissinger too. I know he wasn't perfect, but of course, none of us are perfect. So that was I meant that in a good way too, because I did like Kissinger. Kissinger was, those were the old days, and it's well, like we said, it's a different day. So hopefully we get through it though. I
Yes,
had a
indeed.
friend one time that had a degree in political science and public policy, and their favorite saying that things go in trends. It goes up, it goes down, and things that are happening now, I think things are going to swing and go in different directions. I think they swing back and forth for a while, then they ease out for a while, but then I think they start wobbling. And it would be nice to say that it'd be nice for everything to get on an equal keel and just keep going, that everything's good. But I do think it probably is going to be that kind of emotion and continue to be that way with civilization and politics. But I don't know. But thank you for being with us again. And as always, I appreciate you being here and I appreciate your views. And I wish you the best, you, the Transhumanist Party, and everything. And anything else you'd want to put? Anything else that's coming up other than the 6th, maybe? Is there any conferences or anything you'd want to plug that are upcoming that people should pay attention to? Or
So I don't plan to attend any conferences myself, but I do encourage anybody to look for events associated with International Longevity Month. This is an undertaking that is now in its 11th year. It is hosted by the International Longevity Alliance, but on the website of the International Longevity Alliance, you can find announcements of events that are going to be happening throughout the month of October in various countries. So, whichever country you live in, or whichever city you're closest to, or even if you can join a virtual event, a conference, or a live stream for International Longevity Month, please take part because, again, we want to show public support for the life extension cause. Additionally, the Longevity Escape Velocity Foundation, or LEVF, which is spearheaded by Dr. Aubrey de Grey, is in the midst of fundraising for the second robust mouse rejuvenation study, where additional interventions are going to be tested to see if they can extend the lifespans of another cohort of mice. And we have a very generous donation from Didier Kernel, who has been one of our biggest supporters and also a prominent transhumanist and radical life extension advocate in Belgium. So Didier has a matching aspect to his donation, and he will match the first $200,000 raised for LEVF in October. Again, if you want to see more rapid progress in longevity research, if you want to see maybe even some mice that set longevity records in the coming few years, then contributing to LEVF would be a great opportunity, especially right now when your funds are going to be matched. And then also be on the lookout for announcements from the Coalition for Radical Life Extension, which is the group that also puts on the RADFest conference. I was in attendance at RADFest in September of this year, and an announcement was made there that there will be a rally for longevity in Washington, D.C. in the spring of 2026. And they want every individual and organization who supports life extension in any way, shape, or form to participate. So put the spring of 2026 into your travel plans, and I hope to see you in Washington, D.C. then.
That sounds great. Well, thank you again for everything and telling us about some of the upcoming stuff. And yep, live long and prosper. And we will talk to you again in a little over a month.
Indeed.
or a little less than a month, actually. So, no, a little
Live
over a
long
month.
and prosper.
Yeah, live long and prosper. Thank you.